Billionaire CEO insulted black waitress, instantly lost his 3.5B empire. He thought money made him untouchable. A billionaire CEO dressed in the finest suit walking into a restaurant as if he owned the entire place. People whispered his name, waiters rushed to serve him, and every eye followed his every move. But in that moment, he didn't see the young black waitress standing at his table as a human being. He saw someone he believed he could belittle. With a smirk, he leaned back, waved his hand dismissively, and called her stupid. Just one word, sharp, cutting, and meant to humiliate. The room went silent. She froze, her dignity crushed in front of strangers. What he didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was that this single insult would shatter his empire, because sitting nearby was the very partner he needed to close a $3.5 billion deal. And that partner had just seen everything. One careless word, one ruined future. This is the story of how arrogance destroyed him. For Maya Johnson, life had never been easy. She grew up in a working-class neighborhood, raised by a single mother who juggled 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Maya had learned early on that respect wasn't given freely. It had to be earned. Every day she carried that lesson with her as she worked long shifts at a high-end downtown restaurant, a place where the wealthy and powerful dined without a second thought about the people serving them. Maya didn't resent the job. In fact, she saw it as an opportunity. She was saving every dollar she could, determined to one day open her own bakery. Behind her quiet smile and graceful movements was a dreamer, someone who refused to let circumstance define her future. But she also knew that the world often judged people like her, black, working class, young, as invisible, or worse, unworthy. That night the restaurant buzzed with an unusual energy. Word had spread quickly. Victor Langford, the billionaire CEO of a global tech empire, was coming in for dinner. To most, he was larger than life, a man who turned startups into empires, who lived in mansions overlooking oceans, who traveled on private jets. He was power personified, and when someone like that walked into the restaurant, everyone noticed. The staff whispered nervously as they set the table, polishing glasses until they gleamed. Customers craned their necks hoping to catch a glimpse of the man whose name was constantly in headlines. When Victor arrived, the room shifted. He walked in flanked by assistants, his tailored suit perfectly pressed, his watch gleaming with quiet arrogance. Heads turned, conversations hushed. He carried himself not just as a man, but as a symbol of wealth and authority. But Maya, she wasn't impressed. She had seen men like Victor before. Men who believed money excused cruelty, who treated waitstaff like background props in their story. Still, she carried out her duties with grace, approaching his table with the same professionalism she showed every guest. Victor barely looked at her. He snapped his fingers to order a drink, didn't acknowledge her greeting, and spoke over her as though she wasn't even there. To him, she was part of the decor, useful only when needed. Maya swallowed her frustration, reminding herself to stay calm. This wasn't about her pride. It was about her paycheck, her future. She couldn't afford to make waves. But that night, Victor wasn't just there to enjoy a meal. He was there to finalize the biggest deal of his career, one worth $3.5 billion. Across the room, a potential partner waited discreetly, observing Victor's behavior with quiet interest. This partner wasn't impressed by his wealth alone. Character mattered. Respect mattered. Victor, however, didn't see that. All he saw was another opportunity to flaunt his dominance, another evening to remind the world that he was untouchable. He didn't know that his empire's future hinged on something far simpler than profit margins and contracts. It hinged on how he treated the very people he thought didn't matter. And when the moment came, when he let arrogance guide his tongue, he would discover that one careless insult could cost him everything. Maya balanced the tray in her hands with practiced ease, her heart steady even as she approached Victor Langford's table. She had dealt with demanding customers before, but something about Victor's smug expression told her this was going to be different. Sparkling water, room temperature. Not too fast, he ordered without looking up, his eyes fixed on his phone. The words weren't a request, they were a command. Maya gave a polite nod, her tone even. Of course, sir. Right away. When she returned with the bottle, Victor sighed dramatically, as if her presence itself was an inconvenience. He snatched the glass before she could set it down properly, spilling a few drops on the pristine white tablecloth. The billionaire frowned, his lips curling. Clumsy, he muttered, not even meeting her gaze. Maya bit her tongue. She had dealt with worse, but she noticed something others didn't. A man seated a few tables away, watching closely. He was dressed simply, no flashy suit, no entourage, but his eyes followed every movement, every word exchanged. He wasn't just another diner. He was the investor Victor was trying to impress. The restaurant hummed with low conversation, but Victor's arrogance cut through the air like a blade. He waved Maya back over. Steak, medium rare, and make sure it's done right this time. Last time I came here, it was a disaster. Honestly, do they even train you people? You people. The words stung, but Maya kept her composure. She wrote down his order, her voice steady. I'll make sure the chef prepares it exactly to your liking. But Victor wasn't finished. When Maya returned with bread for the table, he leaned back in his chair, smirking. Unbelievable, look at this, bread before steak. Who even taught you how to serve? Are you really this stupid, or is it just part of the uniform? Across the room, the investor's expression hardened. He leaned forward in his seat, his lips pressing into a thin line. To him, this wasn't just poor service. It was a test of character. Victor, oblivious, carried on with his tirade. He chuckled, nudging his assistant. Imagine trusting someone like this with anything important. It's laughable. He picked up his phone, scrolling as if Maya had ceased to exist. Maya excused herself with dignity, turning away before her emotions could spill over. She had endured insults before, but something about this moment felt heavier. Not because of Victor's words, but because she could feel eyes on her. The staff, the guests, the quiet man who hadn't looked away once. The tension in the room thickened. Every word Victor spoke echoed louder than it should have, every smirk another nail in the coffin he didn't realize he was building. The investor set down his glass, his decision forming before the steak even reached the table. A $3.5 billion deal hung in the balance, and it wasn't Victor's empire of numbers and contracts that mattered. It was his humanity, or lack thereof. And as the plates were carried out, the room itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment arrogance would finally meet justice. The steak arrived, perfectly cooked, the aroma rich and mouth-watering. Maya placed the plate in front of Victor with steady hands, though her pulse thundered beneath her calm exterior. Medium rare, just as requested, she said politely, her voice controlled despite the sting of his earlier words. Victor didn't even look at her. He sliced into the meat, chewed dramatically, then pushed the plate slightly forward. Barely acceptable, he scoffed. His assistant gave a nervous chuckle, as if unsure whether to laugh or cringe. But the investor at the next table didn't flinch. His eyes were locked on Victor like a judge waiting for the verdict. Maya started to step away, but Victor wasn't done humiliating her. He leaned back in his chair loud enough for nearby tables to hear. You know, it's amazing. I build billion-dollar companies, negotiate deals that shape industries, and yet I still have to put up with service like this. People who can't even get bread and water right. He shook his head, smirking. Stupid. The word landed like a thunderclap. A couple dining nearby paused mid-bite. A young server froze in her tracks, her face pale. Maya's chest tightened, but she refused to break in front of him. She gave a small professional nod and turned away, her dignity intact, and that's when the silence broke. The man at the other table, the quiet investor Victor had been courting for months, pushed back his chair and stood. The room seemed to pause around him. He wasn't flashy, but his presence commanded attention. He looked directly at Maya first, his tone measured but firm. Miss, I want to thank you. The service tonight has been excellent. His words carried through the room like a balm, steady and respectful. Maya blinked, caught off guard, and for the first time that evening she felt seen. Then the investor turned to Victor. His eyes were sharp now, his voice steel wrapped in calm. Victor, do you know why I agreed to meet you here? It wasn't for your reputation. It wasn't for your money. It was because I wanted to see who you were outside the boardroom. How you treat people when you think no one important is watching. Victor forced a laugh, waving a hand dismissively. come on. Don't tell me you're going to take offense at a waitress. She doesn't matter to the deal. The investor's expression darkened. That's where you're wrong. She matters more than the deal, because respect isn't something you turn on and off depending on who's in front of you. It's either in you, or it's not. A murmur rippled through the restaurant. Victor's assistant shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting toward the exit. Victor's smirk faltered, confusion creeping into his arrogance. Are you serious? You're going to throw away a multi-billion-dollar deal over this? The investor didn't raise his voice, but every word cut sharper than a knife. I'm not throwing it away, you are, because I don't invest billions into arrogance. I don't partner with men who think belittling others makes them powerful. Tonight you showed me exactly who you are, and it cost you everything. Cost. The silence that followed was deafening. Victor's face drained of color, his bravado collapsing under the weight of the moment. Around the room, people exchanged glances, some shaking their heads, others whispering. Maya stood still, her tray clutched against her chest, her eyes wide. For the first time in her career, she watched justice unfold right in front of her. Not in private, not behind closed doors, but in the full light of day. The investor looked at her one last time, offering a small nod of respect before turning back to Victor. Good luck finding someone else to save your empire. As far as I'm concerned, this deal is dead. And with that, he walked out, leaving Victor frozen in his chair, $3.5 billion gone in the span of a heartbeat, undone not by a competitor or a market crash, but by his own arrogance. The door to the restaurant closed with a soft thud behind the investor, but the weight of his words lingered in the air like thunder after lightning. For a moment no one moved. Even the clinking of silverware had stopped, as if the entire room was holding its breath. All eyes were on Victor, the billionaire CEO who just hours ago had walked in like he owned the world. Now he sat hunched in his chair, his complexion pale, his jaw clenched. His assistant fidgeted nervously, typing something frantically into a phone, maybe trying to salvage the pieces of a shattered empire. But there was no salvaging this. Everyone had heard. Everyone had seen. Maya stood by the corner of the dining room, her heart still pounding in her chest. She hadn't spoken a word after that brutal moment, but she didn't need to. The truth had been spoken for her, louder than anything she could have ever said. Slowly, as if waking from a trance, the other diners began to move again. But the atmosphere had changed. Instead of whispering in hushed tones about Victor's wealth or status, people were murmuring about the waitress, the one who had stood tall under humiliation and walked away with dignity. A few customers even caught Maya's eye, offering subtle nods of respect, their gazes warm with silent solidarity. Victor, on the other hand, was unraveling. He barked something at his assistant, his voice sharp but trembling. Call him. Get him back. Fix this. But the assistant didn't move. Instead, he stared at the phone in his hand, eyes wide. Sir, it's already trending. He turned the screen around, showing Victor a flood of headlines, tweets, and breaking news alerts. Investor walks out on Victor Hayes after public outburst. Billionaire CEO humiliates black waitress. Loses 3.5B deal. Victor snatched the phone, his hands shaking, eyes darting across the words. Each headline was like a nail being hammered into the coffin of his reputation. He pushed back his chair and stormed toward the exit, his footsteps heavy and uneven, his voice muttering curses that no longer carried authority. Only desperation. Maya exhaled, finally, the tension leaving her shoulders in waves. She hadn't asked for any of this. She hadn't wanted to be the center of a storm. All she had wanted was to do her job with dignity, to provide for her family, to live without fear of being belittled for something she could never change. But tonight had shown her something profound. Sometimes the world does watch. Sometimes justice arrives not with a gavel or a headline weeks later, but right there in the moment, raw, undeniable, and powerful. Her manager approached quietly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You okay? He asked softly. Maya nodded, though her throat tightened. She wasn't sure if she was okay, but she knew she was stronger than before. And for once, she didn't feel invisible. Later that night, when she finally walked home, she thought about everything that had unfolded. She thought about the man who had spoken up, not because it was convenient, not because it benefited him, but because it was right. In a world where silence often protected power, his voice had become a shield for her. And that mattered more than the money, more than the deal, more than Victor's empire collapsing. Because what Victor lost wasn't just 3.5 billion. He lost credibility. He lost trust. He lost the illusion of power that had shielded him for so long. And Maya? She had gained something priceless: validation. Proof that respect was not optional, no matter how high someone sat on the corporate ladder. The story spread like wildfire. Headlines shifted the spotlight from Victor's arrogance to Maya's resilience. Social media filled with messages of support, strangers sharing her story as a reminder of dignity, justice, and the cost of cruelty. For once, the narrative wasn't about a powerful man crushing someone beneath him. It was about a woman who stood, silent yet unbroken while arrogance destroyed itself. And in that truth was the lesson that would outlast any business deal. Respect isn't negotiable. Humanity isn't optional. And when arrogance collides with dignity, only one survives. So the question remains, how many more victors will it take before the world finally learns that the way you treat people is the ultimate deal breaker?